Making news this hour, Ireland and Wales are becoming the first in Europe to re-enter lockdown as the number of COVID-19 cases reaches more than 40 million across the globe. Also, 4 students are among 15 people who've been taken into custody here in France following the beheading of teacher Samuel Paty. The government vowing to tighten its grips on institutions and charities with suspected links to extremist groups. And the first official United Arab Emirates delegation has touched down in Israel, this after the two countries normalised ties last month under a Washington-brokered accord forged largely over shared fears of Iran. And it's time now for a look at some of the day's business news, and for that I'm joined by Cole Stangler in the studio. Cole, you're starting with a look at the push to recruit more nurses in France, and this of course is imperative as we now face a second wave of the pandemic.
That's right, Annette. The government extended wage hikes this fall and is planning another round before the end of the year. It's designed, at least in part, to attract more workers into the public health sector, which has struggled in recent years to compete for new recruits with the private sector. But many posts in hospitals still remain vacant and at an especially inopportune time. Solange Mougin takes a closer look at the labor shortage and how authorities are fighting to address it.
Insufficient budgets, low wages, not enough personnel. Difficult working conditions that hospital staff have been raising alarm bells about for years. But the coronavirus pandemic created public outrage. And this summer, the government promised wage increases for nurses and hospital staff. An additional €90 a month was rolled out this fall, and another similar raise is planned before the year's end. But nurses are still leaving. Changing careers or moving to private hospitals. Nationally, 100,000 positions remain vacant. A third of them, nurses.
Un des points faibles de la fonction publique était justement les grilles salariales. C'est vrai que pour un jeune diplômé, quand on voit ce que peut proposer une structure privée par rapport à ce que nous, on leur proposait sur un premier poste, il y avait un écart. Donc effectivement, la revalorisation des salaires va être un argument et un point positif pour nous.
Bonjour!
At 22, this nurse is just out of school. She's one of the new recruits at the Nemours Hospital, where the gross base salary is €1,600 a month.
C'est toujours bon à prendre ces 90 € en plus.
One of the issues raised in negotiations this summer was a lack of training programs. More hospital beds are needed, but so too are personnel to watch over the patients.
Il faut un travail qui est énorme, qui est dur. Et je pense que le salaire, il vaut pas le quart de ce qu'elles font.
With staff still spread thin, nurses say their working conditions remain incredibly difficult. And the coronavirus pandemic, they say, has made that abundantly clear.
Take a look now at some of Tuesday's trading action. The major European index is all hovering around the flat line so far. Investors cautious as they monitor rising cases of the coronavirus across Europe. The FTSE actually up a little bit further, now around 0.4%. Slightly larger gains on the CAC 40 here in Paris, while the DAX in Frankfurt down around 0.25%. Now, also weighing heavily on investors is the apparent lack of progress in stimulus talks in the U.S., with Democrats and Republicans continuing to butt heads. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said today is the deadline to reach a deal before next month's election. She met with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin Monday, with the two saying afterwards, the quote, they continued to narrow their differences. The House's $2.2 trillion plan is slightly more than what the White House has backed. Any deal, though, still needs to get through the Republican-controlled Senate, where opposition to further stimulus has been the most pronounced. Now, the world's largest asset manager is also reporting a big spike in profits. UBS reported a net income of €1.8 billion for the 3 months ending in September. That's up a staggering 99% from the same period last year. Beating analyst expectations, the group's investment bank division performed especially well amid heavy turnover in global markets, as did its wealth management wing. The Swiss bank called the earnings its best third-quarter results in a decade. Now to Kenya, where, like much of the developing world, the COVID crisis has seen an alarming increase in the use of child labor. The UN has no firm estimate of how big the spike is, but it's believed to be well into the millions.
Since the coronavirus hit, books and lessons have been replaced by hammers and back-breaking work. 12-year-old Elimanta spends her days crushing rocks alongside her 7- and 10-year-old siblings.
While the other children play, we have to work. We earn money that our mother uses to take care of us. Sometimes when Mom finds work elsewhere, we still have to come here alone.
Their mother, a cleaning lady in a private school, lost her job when the coronavirus came to Kenya. So the family's been forced to work at the quarry. It pays each of them less than $1 a day.
I have to work with them because I make very little money and they need to eat. When we work as a team, we can make enough money for breakfast and also lunch.
Even if child labor is illegal in Kenya, many families have been left with little choice. Country-specific figures are still being calculated, but UNICEF believes that millions of children in the developing world may have been forced into hard labor or child prostitution by the pandemic, leading to potentially lifelong ramifications for kids across the globe.
UNICEF has learnt from things like Ebola. The longer kids are out of school, the more likely for the poorest, yet again the poorest, won't actually return.
The good news is that since 2000, some 97 million children have been kept from child labor. But rights groups fear that the coronavirus could roll back these 2 decades of progress, of getting kids out of trash dumps, quarries and sweatshops and into schools.
Next up, the United States and Brazil are strengthening trade ties, though not without sparking some backlash, as the countries agreed to a string of so-called mini deals designed to strengthen regulation and fight corruption. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stressed the importance of both nations reducing their dependency on China. On Tuesday, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry reacted to those comments. He called them a smear against Beijing.
China resolutely opposes some US politicians having a Cold War mentality and holding ideological bias in order to engage in deliberate smearing and to try to disrupt normal economic and trade cooperation between China and other countries.
And finally, Visa and MasterCard are under fire in the UK. British retailers have accused the firms of charging excessive fees and have asked the country's top competition regulator to investigate. They say the fees charged by the two companies have nearly doubled in the last 2 years, and that they may be forced to pass the extra costs on to customers. Visa and MasterCard haven't responded directly to those allegations. Either way, though, a net especially high-stakes issue today given the decline in cash payments, also something we've seen accelerated by the health crisis.
Absolutely. I mean, these days it's very rare to see any exchange of cash, isn't
True.
there? Thanks to COVID-19. Thanks for that, Cole.